Lydia Brooks never imagined that her life would one day fit inside a plastic bucket filled with gray water. As she knelt on the cold marble floor of Miller and Stone Holdings, the company she once helped build, she heard footsteps echo down the hallway. The young secretary, Eevee Carter, stepped out of the reception area with streaks of mascara running down her cheeks. She looked terrified. "Miss Brooks," she whispered, "please listen to me. Something is about to happen." Before Lydia could respond, Evie grabbed her wrist with trembling fingers. Her voice cracked as she spoke again. "Hide right now. You need to hear this. It's about you." Evie pushed her toward the open doorway of the executive office. Lydia had not stepped inside that room in months, not since the night her husband, Grant Miller, locked her out of their home and told her she was no longer part of his future. But there was no time to hesitate. The tension in Evie's voice was too real to ignore. The moment Lydia ducked beneath the massive oak desk, the world shifted. She pressed her palms to the carpet, her heart pounding like a warning drum. Whatever was coming, she sensed it would shatter the last pieces of the life she once knew. And the story of how she got here, hiding like a fugitive in the office she helped design, all began long before this moment. It began with the day everything was taken from her. Before everything fell apart, Lydia Brooks lived a life that looked steady from the outside. She had spent nearly a decade helping her husband, Grant Miller, transform a small furniture startup into a multi-million-dollar corporation. In the early years, they worked side by side, sharing cold sandwiches during late nights and drawing plans on napkins when ideas struck at random. Grant used to tell her that she was the backbone of the company. He used to say they were a team. But success has a way of changing people. Grant became sharper, more polished, more obsessed with image. Lydia, who once coordinated departments and managed high-profile clients, stepped back temporarily after a skiing accident damaged her knee. She walked with a slight limp for a few months, something Grant claimed made the company look unprofessional. One evening, without warning, Grant placed her suitcase by the front door. His expression was calm, almost practiced. "You don't fit the direction I'm taking anymore," he said. "You used to be useful, Lydia. Now you are slowing everything down." Those words sliced deeper than anything she expected. She left with two small children, Aiden and Maya, and moved into a modest apartment on the edge of Southport. Money was tight. She cooked simple meals, stretched every dollar, and tucked her kids into a bed that creaked whenever they rolled over. When her savings ran out, she applied for work everywhere she could think of. The only steady job she found was as a janitor at the very company she once helped manage. She took the job without hesitation. Pride no longer mattered. Survival did. As she scrubbed floors, no one noticed. She kept telling herself that this was temporary. She had no idea that something far worse than hardship was waiting for her. Working as a janitor at Miller and Stone Holdings was nothing like Lydia remembered. The hallways she once walked with confidence now felt narrow or colder. Employees who used to greet her with warm smiles avoided eye contact, unsure how to react to her sudden fall from grace. Some whispered, others simply pretended she did not exist. One morning, as she polished the glass railing outside the executive wing, the elevator chimed. Grant stepped out, surrounded by two board members. His suit was tailored, his posture stiff with importance. Lydia kept her head down, hoping he would walk past without noticing. He stopped directly in front of her. "Make sure you get that corner," he said loudly, pointing at a tiny smudge on the glass. "We cannot have the place looking like a dump." The board members exchanged awkward glances. Lydia nodded silently and continued wiping, her face burning. Grant smirked, clearly enjoying the moment. It was not enough for him to cast her out of their home. He needed to crush whatever dignity she had left. As he walked away, she heard him laugh. She wanted to defend herself, to remind him of the years she had given to him and the company, but the words lodged in her throat. She could not risk losing the job that kept food on the table for Aiden and Maya. That same afternoon, Eevee Carter hurried past her again, eyes glossy and unfocused. Lydia noticed fresh tears on the young woman's lashes. Something was deeply wrong, but Lydia was too exhausted and too overwhelmed to ask. She had no idea that Eevee was the only person left in the building who still cared enough to warn her. Eevee Carter appeared again just before noon, her face pale and tense. She glanced over her shoulder as if someone were following her. When her eyes met Lydia's, she gave the smallest shake of her head, a silent plea for her not to speak. Then she motioned for Lydia to follow. Lydia hesitated. Eevee was young, barely in her 20s, and usually avoided drawing attention. Seeing her, this rattled, sent a cold ripple through her chest. She set down her cleaning cart and trailed behind her toward the executive floor. When they reached the large double doors of the conference room, Eevee whispered, "Hide under the desk. Do not come out no matter what you hear." Lydia froze. Hide? The word felt absurd. She wanted to ask why, but Eevee's expression told her everything she needed to know. Something dangerous was unfolding. Lydia ducked beneath the polished oak table, pressing herself into the shadows just as footsteps approached. The door swung open. Grant entered with Logan Vance, a corporate attorney known for handling messy cases discreetly. Grant spoke first, his tone confident and cold. "I set everything in motion. The fake company is ready. All the paperwork has her signature. Every transfer points to her." Lydia felt her stomach churn. $5 million moved to her account this morning. When the auditors trace it, they'll see one name, Lydia Brooks. She will be the thief. She will have no way out. Logan tapped his pen. "And her fingerprints." Grant chuckled softly. "She cleans every room in this building. Fingerprints are the least of our concerns." Lydia covered her mouth to stop a gasp. The betrayal went deeper than she imagined. Grant wasn't just trying to embarrass her. He was framing her for a crime that would destroy her life. Then Grant said the words that made her blood run cold. "I already called the police. They'll be here in less than an hour. It's time she disappears for good." Under the desk, Lydia squeezed her eyes shut. Her entire world was collapsing, and she had only minutes before everything was over. Lydia forced herself to stay silent as Grant and Logan walked out of the conference room. She waited until their footsteps faded completely before crawling out from under the table. Her hands trembled so violently she had to steady herself against the edge of the desk. Every word she just heard echoed like an alarm in her skull. She had been framed, not by a stranger, but by the man she once built a life with. Eevee slipped back into the room moments later. Her voice shook as she whispered, "You need to leave now. Security is checking every floor. They're looking for you." Lydia grabbed her cleaning cart out of instinct, but Eevee shook her head. "No time. Go through the service hall. You remember the old maintenance route, right?" Of course, Lydia remembered. She was the one who helped design the building in its early days. There was a narrow access corridor behind the elevator shafts that led to the loading dock. Hardly anyone knew it existed. With her heart hammering, she pushed open the service door and slipped inside. The lights flickered overhead, casting long shadows across the narrow metal walkway. Voices echoed somewhere behind her. 2 security officers were sweeping the floor she had just left. She moved faster, gripping the railing to steady herself. Her mind raced. $5 million had been transferred into her bank account. Police were on their way. If she was caught, she would be labeled a criminal before she ever had a chance to speak. When she reached the loading dock, a familiar figure stepped forward. Mr. Harmon, the elderly night guard she once helped secure a medical loan for. Looking at her with sad understanding, he said, "Go," quietly. "I know you did nothing wrong. Hurry." He opened the side gate. An icy wind blasted her face. Lydia pulled her thin jacket tighter and ran into the freezing night, every breath burning. Behind her, sirens wailed in the distance. Her life had just become a race for survival. The cold hit Lydia like a slap. The wind sliced through her thin jacket, and the sidewalks were coated in patches of icy slush. She ran until her lungs burned, stopping only when her hands shook. She pulled out her phone. Notifications flashed across the screen. Her bank app showed a $5 million deposit. The number glared back at her like a trap snapping shut. Grant had planned every detail. Lydia needed help, but there were few people left she could trust. After a moment of hesitation, she headed toward the only place that made sense at that moment, the home of Margaret Miller, her mother-in-law. Margaret had always been distant and formal, but Lydia hoped that for the sake of Aiden and Maya, she might listen. Margaret's townhouse was warm and elegant, filled with soft lighting and quiet classical music. She opened the door with a composed smile that did not reach her eyes. "Lydia, dear, you look frozen. Come in." Lydia stepped inside, her voice cracking as she explained everything: the fake transfers, the police, Grant's plan. She spoke quickly, desperate, hoping for even a flicker of support. Margaret handed her a cup of tea and listened with a calm that felt too controlled. For a moment, Lydia allowed herself to believe she had found an ally. Then she noticed something on the coffee table: a photo of Margaret shaking hands with Logan Vance, the attorney she had heard earlier. Her stomach tightened. Before she could speak, Margaret rose and walked into the kitchen. Lydia stayed still. She listened. A faint whisper traveled down the hallway. "She's here. Bring the phone. We need the banking codes before she bolts." Lydia froze. The betrayal was complete. Grant wasn't working alone. Margaret was part of the plan from the start. She set the cup down with trembling hands and moved toward the balcony door. The cold wind seeped through the glass, but it was her only escape. She could not let them finish what they had started. Lydia slipped out onto the balcony just as she heard footsteps approaching the living room. The cold air struck her face, but she forced herself to climb over the railing and lower herself onto the narrow fire escape. Her fingers stiffened from the freezing metal, yet she kept moving. One wrong sound and Grant would step out to find her there. When she finally reached the ground, she rushed into the alley, breathing hard. Snow flurries whipped across the pavement, stinging her skin. She needed to reach Aiden and Maya. If Grant was willing to frame her for a federal crime, he would not hesitate to take the children, too. She made her way across town, ducking behind parked cars whenever police cruisers passed. By the time she reached her sister's house, her legs were numb and her face burned from the cold. She hurried up the walkway, ready to pound on the door, but two government vehicles were parked out front. A child services worker stood on the porch with a clipboard. Grant's voice carried through the open doorway. "She is unstable. I am doing what is best for our kids." Lydia froze behind a tree, heartbreaking as she watched the scene unfold. Her sister stood helpless as Aiden clung to her leg, crying. Maya reached for her mother, even though she could not see her, her tiny voice trembling. "Mommy, where is Mommy? I want Mommy." Grant crouched down, putting on the performance of a concerned father. He wrapped an arm around both children as if he were their protector, not the architect of their pain. Lydia pressed a hand against her mouth to keep from crying out. If she stepped forward now, she would be arrested on the spot. Her children would watch their mother taken away in handcuffs. She backed away slowly, tears freezing on her cheeks. Every step felt like her heart splitting open. Grant had taken almost everything from her. Now he had taken her children, too. Lydia wandered through the dimly lit streets until her legs could no longer carry her. She found shelter beneath the awning of a closed bookstore, trying to steady her breath. Her children's cries still echoed in her ears. She wiped her face with shaking hands and forced herself to think. Grant had power, influence, and control. She needed someone who could match him, someone he feared. Only one name came to mind: Victor Hale. Years ago, Victor and Grant had been business partners. Their split had been ugly, filled with lawsuits and accusations. Grant won by manipulating contracts behind the scenes, leaving Victor bankrupt and stripped of his reputation. If anyone had a reason to go against Grant, it was Victor. Lydia made her way to Victor's office building, an old brick structure with a flickering sign. She buzzed the intercom, her voice unsteady. "I need to talk to you, please. It is about Grant Miller." Moments later, the door clicked open. Victor Hale stood inside the lobby, older than she remembered, with lines of bitterness etched into his face. When she told him everything Grant had done, he let out a short, humorless laugh. "You expect me to help you," he said. "You are the wife who stood by him when he destroyed my life." Lydia swallowed hard. "I know, and I regret that, but he is doing the same thing to me now. Worse, he has taken my children." Victor was silent for a long moment. Then Lydia shared the details Grant never intended anyone to know: the fake corporation, the hidden transfers, and the shell companies Grant used to move money years ago. Victor's eyes sharpened. Those names were familiar to him, too familiar. "You have just handed me exactly what I needed," he said slowly. Lydia met his gaze. "Then help me. Help me get my children back." After a tense pause, Victor nodded. "We take him down together." Victor wasted no time. He led Lydia into a small back office, cluttered with file boxes and computer parts. On the desk sat a compact recording device, no bigger than a thumb drive. He slid it toward her. "If Grant is as arrogant as you say, he will brag," Victor said. "Men like him always do. Get this on him and the entire house of cards collapses." Lydia picked up the device. Her hands shook, but her resolve hardened. She would do anything to get her children back. That night, Victor arranged for Lydia to enter a corporate charity gala as part of the catering staff. The ballroom glowed with chandeliers and soft music. Lydia adjusted the cap on her uniform, keeping her eyes low as she weaved through the crowd with a tray of sparkling water. Grant was easy to spot. He stood near the center of the room, laughing with investors, acting every bit the polished executive. Lydia felt a twist of anger, but she reminded herself to stay focused. When Grant stepped aside to take a phone call, she seized the moment. She walked past him with purposeful calm, brushing lightly against his jacket. The recording device slipped seamlessly into his inner pocket. It worked. She forced herself not to look back, but before she could retreat, a hand clamped around her wrist. The grip was familiar. "Lydia." She turned to see Margaret Miller glaring at her. The older woman's eyes were sharp and cold. "I knew you would try something. Come with me." Margaret dragged her into an empty hallway. Her pulse raced. "You will sign a statement admitting the theft. Grant will take the children. You will disappear quietly. That is the deal." Lydia stared at her. "You want me to confess to something I did not do?" Margaret's voice lowered. "Sign it, or I make sure you never see Aiden and Maya again." Lydia felt the walls closing in. She needed time. She needed a way out. And somewhere across the ballroom, the recorder in Grant's pocket was capturing every word he said. She just had to survive long enough for it to matter. Margaret pushed Lydia into a small conference room and closed the door behind them. The lights were dim, the air heavy. A stack of documents sat neatly on the table, already prepared, waiting for her signature. Her throat tightened. Margaret slid the papers toward her. "Sign. It is the only way you will walk out of here without handcuffs." Lydia forced herself to read the first page. A full confession, acknowledgement of guilt, agreement to relinquish parental rights until the investigation ended. Her vision blurred. "I cannot sign this," Lydia whispered. Margaret leaned in, her voice sharp. "You think you still have leverage. You have nothing. Grant has outmaneuvered you in every direction. Your fingerprints are everywhere. Your bank account shows the transfers, and soon the entire board will know you are unstable." Lydia's hands trembled. She needed to stall. She uncapped the pen slowly, pretending to reconsider, but before she could speak, the door opened. Grant strode in, adjusting his cufflinks with casual confidence. When he saw Lydia with the document, he smirked. "I knew you would come to your senses," he said. "This is the cleanest way out for you." Grant walked to Margaret's side, placing a hand on her shoulder. The gesture was smug, practiced, as if they had rehearsed this together. Lydia suddenly realized the truth. The betrayal had never been just Grant's doing. Margaret had been part of the plan from the start. Grant leaned over the table. "Just sign, Lydia. You were never meant to be part of this world anyway." His tone cut deeper than the words. Margaret folded her arms. "If you refuse, the police will collect you before the gala ends." Lydia looked between them, the man she once trusted and the woman she once tried to please. Both were prepared to destroy her without hesitation. This was not a negotiation. It was an execution, and she was running out of time. Lydia dropped the pen. It rolled toward the edge of the table, hitting the floor with a soft tap that echoed louder than it should have. Grant's jaw tightened. Margaret sighed impatiently. "Enough of this," Margaret said. "I will call the police myself." She reached for her phone, but before she could dial, a knock sounded at the door. Logan Vance, the attorney, stepped inside. His presence filled the room with an unsettling mix of confidence and calculation. "We have a problem," Logan said clippedly. His tone was clipped, uneasy. Grant frowned. "What kind of problem?"
Logan held up his tablet. The bank has frozen all transfers connected to Northline Dynamics, including yours. Grant's face went pale for the first time. What are you saying? My accounts are locked. Logan nodded. And the federal oversight team was alerted automatically. Someone accessed your shell corporations from inside the building. Margaret's expression stiffened. Who would do that? Before Logan could answer, the overhead speaker crackled. A voice boomed through every hallway in the gala venue. Grant Miller knowingly authorized fraudulent transfers through Northline Dynamics. This is an active federal investigation. Audio evidence has been forwarded to the authorities. Lydia's breath caught. She knew that voice. Eevee Carter. Margaret spun toward the door, panic rising. What is she doing? Logan scrolled rapidly on his tablet. She's live streaming from the server room. She routed the feed through multiple channels. We cannot shut it down. In the hallway, murmurs rose as guests listened to the broadcast. The recording of Grant's conversation with Logan played word for word. His confession, his plan, his intentions. Grant lunged for the door. That girl! But before he could escape, police officers surged into the room, blocking his path. Grant Miller, one officer announced, you are under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. Grant turned toward Lydia with shock and fury twisting across his face. What did you do? Lydia stood tall for the first time in months. Not nearly as much as you did to yourself. Grant was handcuffed so quickly that he barely had time to process what was happening. Margaret lunged toward Grant, shouting that there had been a mistake, that her son would never do such a thing. The officers ignored her and continued reading Grant his rights. Logan slipped out of the room the moment attention shifted away, his expression tight with fear. Lydia felt her knees weaken, but she refused to collapse.
This was not the end. Not yet. The $5 million sitting in her bank account still tied her to the case, and her children were still under Grant's temporary custody. She needed to clear her name fully before she could even hope to get them back. A female officer approached her gently. "Are you Lydia Brooks?" Lydia nodded, bracing herself. "You are not under arrest," the officer said. "The investigation points to you being set up. We have been instructed to escort you to the station for a full statement." Lydia agreed without hesitation. Hours later, in a quiet interview room, she told investigators everything, every detail of Grant's manipulation, every fraudulent step he had taken. And then came the final surprise. The federal agents informed her that legally, on paper, Lydia, not Grant, was listed as the responsible officer for the Shell Corporation. It was exactly the proof they needed. Grant's intent was undeniable. When the questioning ended, Lydia stepped outside the station to find Victor Hale waiting beside his car. "Get in," he said. "We have one more stop to make." Her heart raced. "Where?" "To your children," Victor replied. "I called Child Services myself. They heard the broadcast. They know the truth now." Lydia covered her mouth as tears blurred her vision. For the first time since the nightmare began, hope did not feel distant. It felt real. Victor drove Lydia across town in silence, the city lights blurring past the windows. Lydia pressed her hands together to stop them from shaking. She had imagined this moment 1,000 different ways, but now that it was real, she could hardly breathe. When they reached the Child Services office, a social worker stepped outside to greet them. Her expression was soft, understanding. "Miss Brooks," she said gently, "after tonight's events, we reviewed your case immediately. The children are waiting for you inside." Lydia followed her through the hall, her footsteps unsteady. Then she heard it. "Mom!" Aiden sprinted toward her, throwing his arms around her waist with such force she nearly lost her balance. Maya rushed in next, burying her face against her mother's coat. Lydia dropped to her knees, wrapping both children in her arms. Warm tears fell freely as she whispered over and over, "I am here. I am here. You are safe now." The social worker stepped back, giving them privacy. Victor watched quietly from the doorway, his stern expressions softened by the scene. Later that night, Lydia settled the children into the guest room of a small townhouse Victor had arranged for them temporarily. She tucked Maya in first, smoothing her hair.
Aiden fell asleep with one hand still gripping hers, afraid she might disappear again. Lydia stood in the hallway, finally letting out a long breath. Grant was in federal custody. Margaret faced charges for her part in the scheme, and for the first time in months, the fear that had lived inside Lydia began to loosen. She was not just surviving anymore, she was reclaiming her life. What she did next would determine everything about the future she wanted for herself and her children. 6 months later, Lydia Brooks sat in the corner office of Miller and Stone Holdings. The nameplate on the door was new, the responsibilities were heavy, but for the first time in years, the air around her felt calm. After the investigation closed, the board voted unanimously to remove Grant from his position. With Victor's endorsement and overwhelming evidence of her innocence, Lydia was appointed interim CEO, then permanent CEO. 3 months later, she restructured the company, removed the toxic executives, and promoted employees who had been overlooked for years. A framed photo sat on her desk, Aiden and Maya grinning beside a lake, sunlight glinting in their hair. They were healing. She was healing. Margaret wrote letters from prison asking to see her grandchildren, but Lydia never replied. Some doors, once closed, were meant to stay shut. Standing by the large window, Lydia thought about everything she had endured, the betrayal, the fear, the nights she cried alone, and the strength she never knew she possessed. Life had taken almost everything from her, but she rebuilt it piece by piece. To anyone listening, Lydia's message was simple. Even when the world tries to break you, you hold on, you fight, and one day you rise again. If her story touched you, share your thoughts in the comments, like the video, and subscribe for more stories on the art of revenge. Your support means everything.